first mistake. Opposing me? Your last.
Iratus, Lord of Undead is a turn-based tactical roguelike with some role-playing elements. There's been so many times where I've played a game and thought how much more fun it would be to play as the evil antagonists. Iratus decides to take that premise and build upon it. It has a lot of unique mechanics compared to similar games of its genre. Given that you play as the titular necromancer Iratus, your means of forming your undead army are uniquely themed. Rather than simply buying the minion you want, or selecting from a random pool, you animate the chosen characters with parts that you've discovered around your base or looted from fallen enemies. Each minion takes a unique combination of 4 parts, which are fairly plentiful to come by, meaning that you'll always get to build the characters that you prefer. On top of this mechanic, there are varying tiers of parts that you can use. A rarer part gives that minion more stat points, and you can even upgrade the ones you have. They can also receive better brains, which will bring them to a higher level. The value of this feature is understated, as you no longer have to start a new character from scratch. While losing a high level minion is still a significant setback, this effectively removes the need for grinding low level characters to reinforce your party. Enemies will drop brains around their level, so you get to reinforce your losses much more quickly. Minions progress and can be empowered through 3 ways: abilities, stats, and items. Each character has 6 abilities, and every 3 levels they gain an ability point. Each ability has 2 ways it can be improved, each offering a minor stat buff as well as a modification to how that ability works. One side could increase the overall damage while the other adds a chance to stun. It gives you greater choice to configure that minion to how you think they'd do best. Then you have your character's stats. Every level they'll gain a point or from parts and brains. These influence things such as the chance to hit, damage range, physical and magical resistance, health, the chance to avoid and crit, and so on. A specific class of character will always start with the same base stats, so this gives you the freedom to improve what that minion is best at while still having room to cover their weak points. You, as Iratus, also level up and have talent points to spend. Picking from 4 different trees, you can pick passive buffs for your minions, improving the loot you come across, as well as a variety of spells. Battles feature a mana pool where you'll be able to cast these. These can vary from buffs, debuffs, and pure damage. Iratus also has battle stats, which are spell power and wrath. Spell power determines how effective a spell is as well as its mana cost, and wrath enables characters to use their more powerful abilities, and increases upon them dealing and taking damage. Minions can also equip 2 items, while Iratus can equip 5 artifacts. Items include such buffs as increasing damage dealt, gaining mana or wrath upon damage, and lifesteal. Regular items can be crafted through parts, but rarer and class-specific items can be looted post-battle, or found through events and your base. Artifacts tend to be more powerful and can benefit both Iratus and his minions. These can improve the health, defenses, and other aspects of your party, while others can increase the experience gain or Iratus' battle stats. Most of the artifacts are permanent and are always in effect, while some others offer powerful buffs or unique rewards that apply for one battle only. They can also be destroyed to give Iratus more experience. Within your graveyard there are 7 buildings to be repaired and utilized, as well as a mortuary to heal your minions. Buildings require souls, which are passively gained per battle. Each building has 4 slots for minions and takes them permanently, meaning you'd want to put lower level characters in. These buildings offer such benefits as generating more souls, gaining Iratus more experience, generating him higher initial wrath for battles, finding artifacts and parts, as well as a training arena for minions. The more characters put into the building, the greater the benefit. The mortuary and training arena obviously don't permanently take your units. As it is currently, you can run out of buildings to upgrade fairly quickly, as for a first time player, it'll take longer to unlock all the minions. So after a while, souls become kind of useless. I'd like if there was a way to spend them to gain more parts, or perhaps you could use souls to improve the quality of your parts you already have. That might make things a bit too easy, but it's preferable than them just collecting dust after a while. The buildings are a good idea in the game, but it does feel slightly underdeveloped. The game's visuals were initially what put me off from playing Iratus earlier. From the initial still images and GIFs that I saw, the impression I got was that the game looked tacky, almost like a mobile game. But that couldn't be further from the truth. Once you experience the actual game for a while, whether that be playing it for yourself or watching it, You get to actually appreciate the detail put into the game's characters, backgrounds and animations. I'd say the enemy design is extremely consistent and well detailed, while the appearance of minions can sometimes vary. They're all good, but when next to each other, some definitely outshine others, and that can be a bit jarring as it makes the art style seem messy. The game's music holds up quite well. The battle music adds to the tenseness of the fights, and then you have a more atmospheric, gloomy music for when out of combat. They also picked Stephen White, voice of Caleb from Blood, to play Iratus.
Now, prove yourself worthy of my investment. Impale this wretch. As worthless as you were in life, you will be worth something in death.
His narration and quips go hand in hand with the music to make a much more engaging experience. The game has 18 minions to pick from, and while they all are in game, with one extra being available only through the supporter pack, you start with just 6 and unlock the others throughout further playing. That might leave some frustrated, but I can understand why they did it, as having all 18 from the start would take away a significant element of progression for the player to experience. It also adds replayability to the game, because by the time you've completed a run, you'll have new minions to try new strategies with. The majority of them aren't particularly difficult to unlock either, defeating 2 bosses, completing the game on normal, and dealing wrath damage. These are all things you're going to achieve just by playing the game, but there are a few more unlocks which certainly are more difficult, such as turning enemies into vampires, which requires a specific spell and some patience, or inflicting a certain amount of damage on your own units. That one was the worst, but still worth doing to access a new minion. With 18 unique characters to pick from, there's a strong variety of minions where each has their own unique twist. You have the zombie, which serves as a tanky range unit, the lich who can summon units, kill a fellow minion to regain health, and all around just be a jerk. There's the ghoul, which is a highly mobile melee character, which can gain some insane buffs from consuming enemies. And my favourite, the Shade, which is all about making your enemies' days even worse, and can deal some massive burst damage. That's only 4 of them, but each has their own appeal, synergies with other minions, as well as strengths and weaknesses, which is honestly pretty impressive for a relatively large roster to pick from. I think the units you unlock later on are a bit more exciting compared to the ones you start with though. Something like the Death Knight and Skeleton aren't too exciting, but are still useful. Yet, I'd be lying if I didn't say that I got sick of them fairly quickly. While each minion does have their own merits, the game would definitely need some more balancing work done post-release, as some characters have a better roster of abilities, and most of them are the ones you have to unlock. Now, for the actual gameplay, Iratus has returned and the forces of the living are at his doorstep, and rather than sitting there and being attacked by individual groups of adventurers one by one, you decide to attack them first. The game consists of fighting your way through a floor to a boss at the other end. Each floor is a large, randomly generated maze with branching paths and differing challenges. The unique thing is that you can see the entirety of a map and the events that lay ahead, but you can only see what type of enemies there are when nearby. There's also no backtracking, but you can definitely choose between heading straight to the boss or taking the longer route to experience more fights and events. Along the way you'll come across regular enemies, elite versions of them, mini-bosses and various loot rooms. You can go between the map and your base whenever you want, so you'll be able to swap out and improve your minions, buildings and Iratus in between each battle. There's also a few instances of multi-choice events. These are neat, but are definitely far and few between. If the developers wanted to make the game feel a bit more interactive story-wise and deepen the lore a bit, this is the first thing they should look into. Events could have a few more branching choices where you come across information regarding the world that the game is set in or about Iratus' past, because currently there isn't really a story. Ultimately, this isn't necessary as Iratus is all about fighting, but a little world building can go a long way. So now we can talk about the combat. If you've played a game like this before, then you know the basics. It's turn-based with initiative determined by a character's speed stat. You can also cast a spell without skipping a minion's turn. Moving someone back and forth is also for a spell which uses a tiny bit of mana. The unique elements of combat for Iratus are inspired by the fact that you're the one leading the evil undead. This is where the game takes some inspiration from Darkest Dungeon with a stress mechanic. In that, it was something that took it from a challenging experience to utterly intimidating. that your powerful heroes could be rendered insane and useless before even dying. Yet in Iratus, given that you're now the one fighting bands of adventurers, you're the one inflicting the stress. It's essentially another form of damage that you can deal. Lowering it can cause your enemy to go insane and gain a debuff, or resist it and gain a buff. Reducing it below 0 can cause them to die from a heart attack, or increase their odds of retreating from battle. So stress is useful, but not as overpowered as you may think it sounds. An enemy like the Dwarven Berserker always does more damage when it becomes insane, and units like golems and gargoyles are immune to it, so relying too much on it can make some fights much more difficult. Another aspect of Iratus is that there is block and ward shields. Block will negate a physical attack while ward a magical one. These can be gained from certain abilities, artifacts, and some magical minions inherently have some, and can gain more through stat points. This introduces the nuance that not every fight is simply a damage race, for both you and the enemy. While certain abilities can ignore or even remove these shields, they will still cause a player to give them consideration, as they can negate even the most deadly of attacks. In battles, there's no reinforcements or ambushes. Everything you see in Iratus is what you get. And I think that's going to be the best and potentially worst thing about the game. It really depends on what you're after. I'm confident there's a lot of people that just want to experience combat, trying out new minions and party compositions. They've removed things that one might consider busy work. Iratus was designed with combat as its priority, and it stands out well because of it. Although I would say that a lot of small mechanics like those add well to a game's sense of personality and pacing, and it's that nuance that helps break up the repetition of the combat for people who do like it, but don't want an endless stream of it. Yet given the extensive amount of customization in Iratus, your downtime in deciding what artifacts, items and spells you should use, which minions are optimal for the next fight, and how you should build them, there actually is a decent amount of time in between fights, if you want there to be, and you'll directly benefit from taking more time to consider all these factors as they can help improve your odds in fights. I read some criticisms that the game has unfair RNG, but those complaints always tend to be the same, usually coming from someone who's not experienced in these types of games or hasn't taken the time to fully understand the mechanics. The truth is that Iratus gives you a lot of tools to deal with any challenge, and that it's also quite possible to come back from losing an entire party, as enemies you previously fought will have the same amount of units and health as of the moment you retreated or were party wiped, which gives you another chance to defeat them and continue your progress. Although if you can't get through that fight the second time, you'll likely need to begin a new run. But in all honesty, Iratus is much more forgiving than you'd expect, while still being a challenging game. There's no random events that put your base or units in danger, and your minions have no other variable to worry about other than their health. All of the game's difficulty revolves around the combat, and for some people that'll leave them feeling like the game has something missing, but for others they'll be able to appreciate the gameplay without detours and RNG. As of this video, there are 3 floors. The mines are filled with slaves, their masters and other opportunists. The area boss is this thick boy, the Keymaster. Then you have the Dwarven Tunnels, whose area boss is the Inventor. And the 3rd level is the Mercenary Barracks, where you encounter a strong variety of professional fighters. Their area boss is the Pyromancer, who's rightfully the toughest boss so far. The floors get progressively more challenging as well, but not to an unfair extent. When the game has its full release on April 23rd, there'll be 2 more floors. The Catacombs, home to some powerful Arcanists, and finally the Cathedral, home to the Order, which is the last line of defense against your undead army. 5 areas might not sound like much, but on my first playthrough it took me 7 hours to get to the Pyromancer boss, and I wasn't being particularly slow either. You could spend from an hour to 3 per floor, depending how much you want to fight, loot, and if you're spending a decent amount of time in between upgrading your base, minions, and Iratus. So I'd say with 5 floors, a run would average around 8 to 10 hours, which is fairly extensive for a roguelike. And I don't see restarting runs being that common, given how you're able to rebuild minions with rarer parts and higher leveled brains. Sure, Iratus isn't as replayable as some similar games. It's intentionally made on a smaller scale to ensure the project would be complete with decent polish. I personally have had no bugs at all throughout my playtime, although I've talked to some people who've had constant game-breaking bugs and save corruptions. So it's a mixed bag, and I don't want to pass off my own experience as fact. But the game definitely does have a lot to enjoy. If you're someone who absolutely loves trying out new party compositions, new minions, and overcoming tactical challenges, you're going to appreciate this game a lot more than someone who just plays through it once and thinks that's all there is to it. It took me 16 hours to finish the 3 floors and unlock every minion. A decent amount of time, and then there's obviously more to do. I need to test out the new minions, see how they work in conjunction with others, and attempt the other difficulties. While Iratus isn't long, it's definitely not short, and it's only going to be better and more extensive after its full release on April 23rd. You'll like Iratus, Lord of the Dead, if you're a fan of turn-based tactics. The being the bad guy necromancer aesthetic also adds a lot to the game's charm. I can understand if you're left wanting though, as bigger games can be bought for a similar price. With that said though, Iratus does a lot to stand out, and I enjoyed it the more I played, coming to appreciate a game which is purely about tactical combat and playing efficiently, without worrying if my characters were going to have a mental breakdown along the way. Thanks for watching, thank you to my patrons, and I'll see you next time.